IVM.
Welcome to Audio Gyan with Kedar Nimkar, a podcast that documents insightful conversations with Indian designers, artists, musicians, writers, thinkers, and creatives of all types. Catch us on iTunes or visit audiogyan.com for more Gyan sessions. Here's your host, Kedar Nimkar.
Today, I have Sulekha Rajkumar with us on AudioGyan. Sulekha is an independent graphic designer, type designer, and a lettering artist. She has over 12 years of experience in designing for brands from aviation, personal care, F&B, healthcare, banking and financial services to hospitality industry. She has a very insightful and worth listening talk recorded in 2015 at Typo Day, which is on YouTube. She also conducts workshops on lettering and is a visiting faculty at Srishti School of Arts. Today we are here to talk about type design, lettering, and most importantly, multilingual branding challenges. So thank you, Sulekha, for giving your time, and it's a real pleasure to have you on AudioGyan.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I have these few things, and if you can you can set the context by telling us, at least for a layman, for me, lettering has always been people who do typesetting at signages or some sort of, that's how I perceive lettering.
Right.
So if you can just set the context by telling us what's the difference between lettering and calligraphy? What is lettering, maybe? And then we can open up more questions.
Sure. I think the best way to understand lettering is one is to understand it in and of itself, but also you asked a good question, what is calligraphy and lettering, because it helps to understand it in the context of other art forms that deal with letters as a subject. So calligraphy being one of them. We have lettering, we have type design, and then we have typography. So it'll be nice to go through all four, because then I think it helps, get a good understanding of it. So we start off with calligraphy, and it's the simplest definition is just the art of writing. And you see it historically in traditional forms like manuscripts. You see it in China. It was used both as a means of communication as well as aesthetic expression. In the Islamic world, it was considered one of the highest and noblest forms of art, especially in the context of using it for religious texts. So you'll find calligraphy on architecture, in books. The Quran is you'll see so many stunning styles. In India, we've seen it a lot in manuscript tradition. There's the Jain Kalpasutra manuscripts have a very distinct style of their own. And what happens with calligraphy is that one is you're working with a tool, and in those times, there were limited tools, or not limited, I would say. They would use specific tools and say specific kinds of material that you write on. And that action, or say the limitations of the tool, the limitations or possibilities of the tool as well as the paper, the material, created very distinct styles. So the styles got derived not just by the artist's expression, and certainly that was there, but also what the tools would allow them to do. So
also there is a element of what kind of quality of paper, the quality of paint, which the ink which was used.
Yes, ink as well. Yeah. So, and the calligraphy, while it was, it served a very distinct purpose earlier, it has remained today as an artistic style. And it's one of those skill sets that you have to keep at it. If you stop for a while, you have to get back to practicing every day to maintain that style. And it's for, calligraphers do it every single day, almost like how one continues to practice music, like playing an instrument. You obviously you won't forget the fundamentals, and you won't understand the ground of what music is based on. But, your motor skills, you still have to constantly keep practicing. And that's calligraphy is something very much like that. We move to lettering.
Yeah.
And lettering is now, if calligraphy was the art of writing, you could say, if calligraphy was the art of writing, lettering is the art of drawing a letter. Now, what does that mean?
So is it a subset of it?
It's not a subset. I would like to look at it more like a spectrum, say calligraphy on one side, lettering on one side.
Okay.
And say lettering would fall under, and maybe it's best to understand with examples. You see, lettering on trucks, on vehicles, the horn okay, please. You'll see on signages, shop signs. I mean, we're both in Bombay, so you still see tons of hand-lettered shop fronts. Film posters, old film posters would have lettering, book covers. So the book titles, the film titles would be all lettered. Now, the difference is that one is right. It's the technique of the skill that is involved in creating it. It's a matter of what you choose to do, whether you want to use a calligraphic style or you want to use a lettering style to create something. But essentially, the skill is different. And lettering, what happens is, because it allows, it's restricted on writing, it allows you to add a lot of decoration and elements, and it can go pretty crazy that way as well. Actually, so can calligraphy. That's both.
So actually, so if I can, sorry to interrupt,
No
but
problem.
if I can ask, because I recently did one interview with, which was like the last interview with about R.K. Joshi.
Okay.
And when he said that, obviously he didn't say it, like it was communicated through Santosh Shirsagar. But the takeaway was, and this is the question, that if calligraphy, you write, say, Queue, whatever that spelling is. So the two E's and the two U's should not differ when you're doing calligraphy. But in lettering, it can differ.
Yes.
Is that a...
He's absolutely right when you're looking at formal calligraphy. So if you're looking at formal calligraphy, yes, then the attempt, or it is really considered the highest skill to be able to reproduce the same letter in the same way. But in more contemporary styles, that's not the case. So you can, if you're writing Queue, you can deliberately want the two E's not to look similar. And that's probably come from the fact that today, because of computers, if you're using a font, E and E will look the same. So you probably want that humanistic touch to it. So you might, like calligraphers may, or lettering artists, and like I like doing that as well, where the letters aren't the same when you repeat it. So it has a more natural element to it. So it's today it's a preference, but he's absolutely right when it comes to formal calligraphy.
And then again, are you supposed to, as a good practice, are you supposed to draw, say, A to Dnya or say A to Z in a particular style so that someone can start using that style in that calligraphy, whereas it's not mandatory in lettering? Is that does that make even sense?
A little bit, yes, because so in formal calligraphy there are styles. So for example, I mentioned the Kalpasutra manuscripts, the Jain they have a very specific style of letters. You've seen the black letter style of the European black letter style of lettering. It looks very I don't know how to describe. But like it's hard to talk about stuff without visuals. But so if you're following a style, like for example, you have the Spencerian style of calligraphy, you are and a formal tradition. Yes, you would master that specific style. But modern calligraphers also have their own style. Now you see, for example, in China, there are different kinds of calligraphy. So there's one thing that's called script. There's a style of calligraphy that's used with a seal. And there are a couple of others which I can't recollect right now. But the results are quite different. So you see even the same calligraphers using the same style of calligraphy, but their expression is quite different. So that had a slightly different take on what formal calligraphy is, but you can get a sense of what there are some. So you could say in terms of like proportions of letters, for example, there will be one style will have that set in place. So it could be proportions of letters. It could be the kind of contrast that's used to write it. Perhaps the tool also defines the style. So it's just again like so within calligraphy, there's formal. And then there's informal. So informal, it's like it's open to whatever anyone wants to do.
It's very close to lettering then.
Yeah,
Maybe,
so like brush lettering again, everyone uses the word brush lettering. But in China, they use brushes to do calligraphy. And there they call it calligraphy. But brush lettering now uses. So it's like I said, it's a spectrum.
And in lettering, is there any lineage? Like calligraphy, you can trace back to, say, ancient Greek or whatever. Like you have some references. But lettering, does that have like
Certainly, actually quite a rich tradition. In fact, it's something that we want to talk more about because a lot of calligraphy is very well documented. Not all, but yes, a lot of it is. And lettering has. I know. But lettering hasn't seemed to. It has drawn the attention of designers. When they want to do something kitsch or pop art like. So you'll find a lot them looking at hand painted signs for to get to be inspired for styles. But lettering artists also it was a art form that was handed down from in those times father to son, and like so people were trained in that particular style. So hand painted signboard artists were specifically lettering artists, and it's just that they didn't sign their names at the end of their brilliant pieces of work. So there are a lot of people who have gone back. Hanif did this project, hand painted type, and what I particularly liked about that is that he went to the hand painted artists, and he interviewed them. He found out about their lineage and about how they got into it is most likely from their father and their grandfather. So it's just that we don't know about it, but it's a very rich tradition. Even for example, building signage, right? So lettering doesn't necessarily have to be something that you draw with a brush or draw with a pen or paint with a brush, but even you cut it out of metal.
Correct. Or carved on a stone.
Tons of...
Yeah. And so this bean bag, whatever, I forgot the name of the art. Like you draw murals with just lettering, right? Bean bag, and then they write the phone number.
Yes.
It's a form of lettering?
Yes, that would be like a graffiti style, you could say. But the beanbag one has become so distinct. I think there should be a beanbag style on its own.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So I would like to just slightly change tracks and want to ask you, your work focuses on like multilingual brand design. So how has lettering helped you improve that skill? I mean, has it, first of all, and if you have any instances of you learned or you observed some sort of a lettering, and then you decided to draw inspiration from that and help in multilingual branding? Yeah. Obviously, we'll speak about multilingual branding further. But just
in general, lettering and branding. So I think branding is one of those... it's an area also where every single element, you're thinking about it very deliberately. And it's not just the logo. So, but even that logo, there's so much thought that's just put into... And in most cases, it's either just the logo type, which is just the letters, and that itself will have its own meaning and expression and style. Or it could be the logo type, say, along with a symbol. Either way, the element of the written word is there. There are, logos that get so well recognized after a certain point. Like today, you see just the Apple. You don't even have to write Apple. But,
Nike,
exactly, Nike. Just the swoosh and that's it. Yeah. So, but the word is probably the name of the company, which is really what it is such a crucial element. And it's like giving a face to that brand, right? And that's the brand's face. And you're going to see that constantly. So there has to be a synergy in the way it looks and what the brand wants to communicate. And what happens with letters is that because there are historical associations with styles as well as pop culture associations with styles, contemporary associations with styles, when we look at a certain style, even if the layperson can't necessarily articulate it, they are constantly feeding into all those nuances that the style of those letters are telling them. So an understanding of one is what those styles mean. So for example, what is the emotive quality of having a rounded terminal typeface which ends in rounded terminals, or super sharp terminals, or flat angular terminals? So what happens is when you know that in some cases people either conform to the general associations with style. Some people push the boundaries, and that again is up to every designer. But certainly, an understanding of it is quite crucial. And when you do have both the understanding as well as the ability to reproduce and draw your own type for a logo, it becomes more distinct. Then, and it definitely is an advantage, because while you do have a wonderful selection of fonts, really there are so many, and you could also spend, and that is like, we didn't get to that, but even typography, just the art of using fonts is a whole other skill set in itself, and an art, actually, not just a skill, but it also you can make a more unique mark if you can draw the letter on your own, because then no one else can set that letter unless they copy that style. But one is, yes, trademark issues, but I think most importantly it is about what that style means. What are the proportions of the letters? Are they tall letters? Are they short? Are they very formal looking letters, or are they funny? Are they quirky? And that, again, what do you want the brand to say? So it's very true. It has helped me a lot.
Yeah. Also, the context in which the person is going to consume it. Is it going to be like always like a big hoarding out, or is it going to be like a type, like a newspaper print article, whatever? So it's just too much nuanced.
Yes.
Yeah. And then what is the most challenging part of multilingual branding? I mean, I've borrowed this question from the talk itself.
Sure.
And so is it the education of the client? Is it lack of good regional fonts? Is it the awareness among designers itself that we have to be very conscious of this responsibility of creating like a regional font for, say, Vodafone, or regional font? In your case, you did for Paradise Biryani, right?
Yes.
So if you can tell me what's the biggest challenge right now? So, I mean, all the three are there, but like among them, what's the biggest one?
All of them are there. I think today, this was also a talk that was, a few years ago. And there are tons of regional fonts, and there are very good fonts out there. And the only thing is, it takes a while to create them. So every time people ask me, shouldn't we be having them? I'm like, yes, but there are few of us doing it. We're trying to get it out. But there are tons of them. I don't think there's really a problem because even if there are there are a lot of fonts, some people say the fewer fonts today and I think what they mean by that is digital fonts in the way that we can access it. But there are whole banks of fonts that have been there for many, many, many years. We spoke about R.K. Joshi, who is a brilliant type designer. Yeah. So there certainly is. But I think it's a combination of the graphic designers as well as clients feeling the need to give the multilingual branding as much importance as the primary logo. We just spoke about, like the identity being like the face of a brand, and it needing to capture every single nuance of or not every single, but at least the main points of what the brand is trying to communicate. So then why do we stop at that? Like why do we settle for any the closest matching font to typeset the regional the brand in the regional name? It seems bizarre to me. Mm-hmm. Which graphic designer could sell and I've been in 20,000 of them where you sell the presentation to the client and you're talking about each single tweak that you've made to the letter, but then you'll just settle for some default font for the regional logo. That's also the face. Yeah. So I think graphic designers, you also see a lot of graphic designers drawing it themselves, and that's wonderful. Mm-hmm. So I think that it is definitely changing. Certainly, I think from in the last few years, it's people are becoming more aware of it. Mm-hmm. The reality is, one is, yes, it is a government. It's legally a company has to have their name in their regional language in India at least, and the law varies from state to state as to what proportions it should be. But apart from that, we are a multilingual country. Correct. We all speak. You and I in the morning, we've already moved from one language to the other quite a few times. And we don't think just in one language. Yeah. So why does our visual landscape need to represent something that is not us? Mm-hmm. And it's a simple thing of if you're trying to convince someone, or if you want to persuade someone, or you want to basically connect with someone, you would most likely speak in their language. right? So, and what are brands trying to do? That's all they're trying to do. They're trying to form a connect with their audience. Why would they not speak in their language? So I think the moment clients realize this, and I think they've been very receptive. The clients I've met, I haven't really actually faced that much pushback when it comes to, it's just that if someone needs to start and saying, okay, we're going to do this, but even graphic designers are very open to the idea. Everyone's open. There's no one's disagreeing with this. It just doesn't, it should happen
I think
more, I suppose.
I think being a designer, I personally feel it's our responsibility to be more proactive and do that extra hard work of like maybe not worry about the invoice at that moment and just try that out and keep pushing out something, and eventually people will. So I've also started one more thing, like even if I borrow image from anywhere, you just put a credit. I mean, it's the reader. Like I just now, just yesterday did one poster for my friend, and it's a whatever. It's like a financial literacy for some people in Ambernath, which is way too far, and probably in some temple he's going to do. So I've given him one A4 size poster, but there also I put in like where the image is taken from. And the reason is some designer somewhere will read it and understand that this is a good ethical practice to follow.
Absolutely.
And then it just maybe in 100 years this will become a norm.
No, it's happening now. I'm very optimistic, but also it needs to be treated a bit like a specialization. So for example, when graphic designers, when they're working in a firm, the moment it comes to say you need photography, you'll get a photographer on board. If a lot of graphic designers can illustrate, but they also collaborate with professional illustrators like a Samil Kuravur, so that you can get like a specific kind of style or a quality rather in terms of illustration. So why not designers tie up with lettering artists and type designers to say, you do the multilingual branding for me. And I think that's where the awareness needs to start, and say that, okay, we can attempt it as well. But would we have attempted our own by ourselves to shoot an ad campaign for a very big client? No, you'd hire a professional photographer who's an expert at it. And I think that's where the difference lies. And I think that is changing though. It is.
So if you were to summarize this part, I think awareness and education is partially there. I think that proactive effort of individual communities and collaborators, they are sensitive. It's just putting in that extra.
And I think the podcast like today will certainly help it more. So
yeah, thanks. So this is one which I also tried to ask Shri Kumar sir from ITC. What impact, either like conscious or subconscious, does a well-designed, say like an English brand, but translated into like a Devanagari script or say Hindi or Marathi, create for a lay person, right? So Vodafone or Burger King written in the same font. What changes in the psychology of a lay person who's just walking down that road?
I think it definitely has a sense of inclusivity, because when you walk down and you say there are two kinds of laypersons. One would be the people who can read English and some people who can't. Even for the people for the people who can't read English, they might start recognizing the image, but again, it's still a bit alienating, right? It seems like a different culture. Even for the people who can read English, it may not be their first language. They must be thinking in their own language. And the moment you see that, it's just a way to connect with people. And but also, I think functionally, if you have a sign, an actual physical store, you would like that store to become a sort of landmark. You want people to say we are near, like you said, the Burger King. So you want everyone to be able to read that also, so that it can become a landmark. Like there's a store called W, and it just has the W on it. And even a lot of, English readers, sometimes when it first came out, not today obviously, but when it first came up, you're like, what is this store called? And a lot of people were reading the Devanagari, the Devanagari text, which is W, and then they said, that's how we should call it, because what do we call it? And this was years ago, and obviously, the hotels are there, so definitely, but it was a fashion brand. I think I'm talking about a decade ago or something.
Clothing brand for actually women, I think.
Yeah.
Cool. And then, I mean, this is a great point. It becomes more inclusive for the...
Definitely,
yeah,
and
everyone.
especially like restaurants. It becomes that's a place that you're going, you're spending an evening with either friends, family. It's an experience center. And
actually, it's
that
a win-win
experience
situation
becomes-
for the brand. Yeah,
Definitely.
I think, and if you can highlight, I mean, in creating a sense of inclusiveness or inclusion is, I don't know, you can't tangibly measure it. But
Yeah.
since you've been doing it, do you have any insights, especially with the Paradise or any of your case studies, if you can just take that one example? And is there any tangible metric to do this? Because like these corporates and brands work on numbers and Excel sheets, right? So
Yeah.
is there any angle to it?
I don't know if I'm sure like one could possibly pull out statistics on familiarity of brands that have distinct. I don't think it's been done, but it could be done. That could be one way to measure it. That have a distinct multilingual identity or a multilingual identity that is representative of the brand itself, or people who are not giving it as much importance, and what is the familiarity or recognition of that brand. But I suppose it is quite an intangible thing to measure, just as it would be
for example,
like color.
When you did that Paradise ka multilingual typeface, did the number of people, the type of people coming in the restaurant changed?
It didn't
like
change.
Different strata of people started coming in just because of being it in Kannada or...
Okay, so what happened with Paradise is because we were starting, the store was, it is a chain of restaurants in Hyderabad, but they were launching one in Bangalore. And in the beginning itself, we had the Kannada logo up. So I don't know if I could measure a difference. But in Paradise, it was very crucial because it is a biryani place and it is for everybody. It is. Everyone... whoever is a biryani lover has got to be there, at the time. And that's what, it did have that kind of footfall, or which it did cater to like a wider audience. But there are two things, like even, for example, I've even done the multilingual identity when I was at Rian Keshavan with a colleague of mine, and we were for Marks and Spencer's. And I think it's like you said, it's a win-win situation. In some cases, I think it's extremely crucial. For example, like a Paradise. In some cases, it helps build that inclusivity. In some cases, it helps build recognition in the visual landscape as a landmark. There's no downside to it. Yeah.
Correct. And how does this entire scheme of thing work? So you also did like a packaging design for Vistara, I believe, right? With
I did the branding for Vistara.
Okay.
Yeah.
So any case study which you worked on where it was not purely like a typesetting or a type change into a multilingual branding exercise, but the rest of the collaterals also. So are there any different insights there? Because here you are now playing with lettering, but now for making, like, say, from letterheads to brochures to cards and to everything, right? So you need to find a closest font, or you create a new font altogether. How does that work?
Right. So Vistara is a project that I worked on with Rian Keshavan. And the symbol is drawn by a super talented colleague and friend, Pooja Jagdish. What I worked on was creating the brand system. And this, I think, will address your question. And one of the most crucial things was even selecting a brand font. What is that distinct font? I think what happens is you want something sometimes that complements the type in the logo itself. You also want, now font selection is very crucial because the style is important. Also the functionality of that font is very important. Does it support multiple weights? Because if you, for example, if you have a font that has fewer weights, and what do I mean by weights, like light, regular, bold, if you have a range of them, you can probably design fresher looking, you have a larger toolkit, let's put it that way. So then your designs are going to have a lot more differences each time you look at it. Whereas if you have fewer styles in the family that you're in, the typeface that you're selecting, it can be a bit limiting for a designer. So if you're looking at a large brand, you do want to go with a very good quality designed font that reproduces very well digitally in printed material in very small sizes and looks gorgeous in large sizes. So for Vistara, we looked at Scene standard, and it's really a very nice font. And to give you an example why we selected that is because the range of the character of that font, it had a very distinct character across the weights. So the light one had this very elegant sophistication to it, and the heavier one had a very I'm struggling to find a word, but it was I'll think about it if it comes. But I know what I'm thinking of visually. And I think there were like about 7 or 8 weights with that font. It's slightly squarish in style, but it's also very warm. And the letters, the Vistara, the logo type itself has a squarish quality. So there was a relationship to the brand, but they're also warm and a little, very approachable. So that's why we selected that. And that
warm is also because of the color of Vistara as well. Right?
Yes,
yeah,
but even it's not just that. I mean, it seems like because you're not looking at it in isolation, right? But I can tell you with the same color, the exact same color and the exact same style with a different layout and a different font, we can make something look cold. Yeah. So
probably Cadbury is the closest color they have, if I can.
Yeah, Cadbury, they've patented their color, so you can't even say that. No, it is, but it is in the purple family.
And just to add 2 cents from my side, in terms of, as you said, like how it renders on digital. So it's a new, like it demands altogether a different AudioGAN session, because when it comes to rendering that font onto different interfaces, you have to check a lot of things, right? How is it going to be read by the screen reader? How is it going to be, what's the latency of it? How prevalent the font is? Do you need to download it on the client side? And it's just a different session altogether.
I had to correct, for the digital font, we went with Open Sans. Which was much easier to get. I think at that time, the licensing, everyone's figuring out, because the numbers were quite different when you were licensing a font for digital use and print use.
It's based on number of impressions your website has, and there are like tons of parameters there.
And then there are cost restrictions.
Yeah. Cool. So I mean, I understand there's a lot more to talk about lettering, calligraphy. Probably we'll do another detailed session on just lettering, maybe with a few of them. But to conclude, in the same talk, you mentioned that brands must. You briefly covered this, but I'll just if you can conclude with that. So brands must adapt to multilingual approaches. So just some thought around that, like any message to any brand, hopefully who's listening and can sponsor this also. Yeah.
So I think one thing I definitely want to touch upon, since today's focus is multilingual branding, is what do we mean by multilingual branding? When I'm saying it needs to have the same qualities as the brand in its whatever script it was designed in originally, so that you can recognize it. So familiarity. You want the visual grammar to match across, logos, regardless of what script it is written in. But also there's one thing which, over the years I've really been passionate about, and now I'm even more so, and a lot of designers are, is when you're working with multiple scripts at the same time, there could be a tendency to impose one script style on the other. For example, in its proportions, or maybe its styles, or it could be just like certain aspects of the visual grammar that are not relevant. So, for example, in English, in Latin, the script is called Latin. You have serifs, right? You have serifs and you have sans serifs. Now, there's no place for serifs in, say, Bangla. So, if I'm doing a multilingual logo for, say, a specific brand, and I'm designing it in Bangla or Bengali, I don't need to take the serifs.
So, how is Times of India? Times of India has a serif edges, right?
It could.
How is Bangla? Do they have a Bangla version of it?
Not that I'm aware of, but I'm going to certainly look at that now. There's no need to, and you can one can always make the argument and say that's just a stylistic and decorative quality, and it's not about right or wrong. But I think it's not just that you have to design multilingual logos, but also how you design it where no script is being compromised. And that's the script, the authenticity of the script is maintained. So what I mean by authenticity is its proportions. Perhaps it's the inherent styles and forms that come with that script you're not overlapping one to the other. So like I'm trying to think of very simple examples that I can state without visuals. Another thing is like capitalization. So in your English logo, if you have a capital letter, you don't need to make the first letter in the regional script bigger. It does not serve a purpose. There's no concept of capitalization. Again, like say in Devanagari or Bengali, you can if you want to. There's no rule. There's no multilingual design police that's going to come and get you. But it's a bit odd because for a person reading it, familiar in that script, reading it in that script is just going to be, why is the first one bigger? It makes no sense. It's like you were writing all lowercase letters, but you just made one letter very big. And that was not even the letter you intended to be big, but you just did it for decorative purposes. So that's something that you need to, which is why I think what I'd like to conclude is with, yes, it's the need for it, but also the sensitivity to how it is approached. And maybe that's why looking at this aspect of branding as a specialized field might help.
For a designer.
For a graphic. For agencies to go to type designers and lettering artists and even for clients to have enough value in it too. Because I don't think it should be done by free, even for the graphic design house. Why should they... why the client should pay for it as they would for a photographer or their food stylist or whatever. So it needs to work well as a network. I think it will.
You can try out. This is like just probably. I'm just thinking aloud. You can, because I tried this barista.
Right.
Writing it in Devanagari is so tough if you want to retain that small is. Right?
You can't.
Yeah.
You can't because that idea is very language specific.
Yeah.
So you can't. So then certain things you just have to let go and not overimpose that idea because is not a word in Hindi. So even if you highlight the e matra and the sa, it makes no sense.
That makes sense, yeah.
But what is this? So there's no need to impose that. You could probably just, it's a very tall condensed font, I believe, right? You could just write it as draw it in that way as close to as possible without trying to highlight any specific letter, unless there was something that was similar. Fantastic.
So you can decorate not at the cost of communicating what you want.
Exactly. I think you summed it up wonderfully.
Obviously. Cool. I think this is a good note to end this. If people have to follow your work, collaborate with you, what's the best way to reach out?
So I have my website, which is under my name. That's sulekharajkumar.com. But I also put some of my personal explorations on Instagram. So that's at Sulekha Rajkumar. You can find me. Then you can DM me from there.
Nice. And any workshop happening near any?
I'm hoping to conduct a workshop in February actually, so I'll keep you posted. In Bombay, yes.
Okay, and you'll post definitely on Instagram.
Yeah.
Cool. And I'll definitely link the YouTube video of you speaking at the Typo Day in the show notes.
Thank you.
So thanks a lot for giving your time, and it was really wonderful talking to you. A lot of insights, a lot of thoughts, things to ponder upon, and definitely would like to have you again on Audio Gyan.
Oh, I'd love to be here. This was such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
And that's it from today's Gyan session. Catch us on iTunes, Saavn, Stitcher or any podcasting app you use. Do rate us on iTunes and follow us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. Stay tuned for more Gyan on audiogyan.com. Till then, bye.
Hello! It's been a great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On This Round is on Me, Gauri is joined by Shweta Nanda. They talk about the financial independence and how it is to be a woman entrepreneur. On Anish Thing, Anish welcomes ultra-marathon runner Shivani Gharat. Shivani shares her journey of how she ran her first marathon, the mindset of a runner, and what it actually takes to run a full marathon. On Cock and Bull, Cyrus, Naveen, Akash and Shreyas talk about the Korean band BTS serving in the military and its repercussions. On Think Fast, Varun and Suchita discuss Wing Greens and their latest acquisitions and about the Indian sexual wellness market. And on Shunya One, Sheila Datya is joined by Dinika Bhatia, CEO and founder of Nuttigrities. They talk about coming from a business family and Dinika's journey in creating healthy and guilt-free snacking. Once again, don't forget to visit our merch store on ivmpodcast.com. We have some exciting new merch out there for you. Also, do follow us on social media. We are IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And do remember to spread the word about these shows and any other shows you might be listening to. Appreciate them, rate them, and review them wherever you are listening to them. You can also check out all our other shows on youtube.com/IVM Podcasts. And finally, we would like to thank our sponsors this week. Volvo XC40 Recharge, Bumble, Heads Up for Tails, Kotak Privy League Program, and HDFC Mutual Fund. Thanks guys, without you this would not be possible.
Do you often find yourself surrounded by conversations about Web3, blockchain, NFTs, DAOs? What are these terms and how do they affect our future on the internet? So many questions, but don't worry, we've got answers to all your questions. Hi, I'm Eklavya Bhattacharya, and on our show Future Proofing, we try to decode the impact of these future technologies on various industries with experts and tech enthusiasts. Tune into new episodes coming out every Thursday on the IVM Podcast app and the website, or wherever you get your podcasts from.